I gotta unmute myself. Thanks everyone. My name's Ashley and I will be co-presenting tonight with Bethany Wray from a Watershed Alliance. And we are really excited to talk to you. So with that, I'm gonna start off the evening with a poll. So Natalie, would you mind launching that poll? Okay, so the first question is, when you are looking at your property, either if it's really big or really small, what are some things that you are doing to help protect our local streams and wetlands? Are you planting native plants? Are you picking up dog poop? Are you washing cars at the car wash? Are you avoiding herbicide and pesticides? Maybe you're doing something else. And then the second question is, what is the closest water body near you? Is it a stream, a river, a wetland, or a stormwater facility? So you guys could answer that. And if you have any other things that you're doing, you'll have a chance a little bit later to maybe share some of those other things you might be doing. And the first question is multiple choice. So Natalie, hopefully soon you can share those results with me. Excited to see what cool things you guys are doing. Do you have everyone?
Just about. I'll share them now.
Okay, cool. Oh, I love it. You guys are all doing all sorts of fun things. And it's really cool to see that you guys we have a collection of different water bodies that are close to you. So we're going to be kind of touching on a lot of these different areas, as well as you'll probably see some of those things that you guys are already doing to protect our streams. So with that, I just want to remind you all that we all play a part in protecting our streams. Throughout this whole Healthy Homes, Healthy Water series, we have learned about all the different ways that we can prevent pollution and help our local waterways. Today, Bethany and I will be covering some of these things that you can do in your backyard specifically. But first, I really think it's important that we all understand what the sources of pollution are and how they are getting to our waterways. So while listening to this presentation, I would love you guys to all think of what are some sources of pollution in your backyard? What can you do to prevent pollution from entering your streams, our streams? Throughout this series, as Nikki said, we have heard from a lot of really awesome speakers with great examples. If you've attended some of those already, you might have already started recognizing some of those sources of pollutions and start identifying ways that you can be preventing them and things that you can be doing. For instance, last week, we learned about pet waste from Eric and Sam. Nikki and Brett from the city of Vancouver talked about exterior cleaners. Erica from WSU Master Gardeners Program talked about ways to reduce pesticide and fertilizer. And Jessica from the Clark County talked about how to manage those chemicals and other household waste, hazardous waste. And then I really loved Peter's presentation where he taught us a few tricks of how to create our own cleaning products and ways on the internet that we could figure out, find out which products of ours are safe and how to find healthier products. And then of course, there was the very first one where we talked about septic systems. So again, these are all great examples of pollution, or not great examples, but ways of sources of pollution. And you can start thinking of those ways to kind of deter the pollution. So There are some features in our environments that can be vectors for pollution that moves from our yards into the streams, rivers, and wetlands. So how does it get there? Contaminants found on roofs, lawns, think of like chemicals that you might have applied in your lawn, or maybe dog poop. There's also your driveway that can, any chemicals there that can be washed down into the stream. You have the water coming down and hitting those impervious surfaces such as your roofs, driveways, and then they create a quick pathway. Those things create quick pathways for water to pick up the contaminants and move directly into our stream. With the lack of vegetation, the water moves quickly and it doesn't have areas to slow down and infiltrate on site. Non-point source pollutions, you may have heard this term before, is all the pollution that is getting picked up along the way to the stream. It isn't an obvious point of pollution. Like I often think of something like a gas spill, where you just know like that's the source of the pollution right there at that location. So being able to recognize some of these unhealthy points in our landscape and those non-point sources will help guide our actions to create healthier streams. So in contrast, we can look into an area like a forest to see examples of things that we can incorporate into our yards to keep pollution from entering our streams. If you think of a forest, it has all those multiple canopy layers, all those trees and shrubs of differing heights. And that is all helping slow down and absorb the water. Versus in the previous example, you think of like your roof. In these natural environments, pollution is filtered out by the plants and by soaking back into the ground. Again, unlike the previous example, the water isn't going directly into gutters and directly into storm drains right into our creeks. Wetlands are another great example of a natural system that functions to help filter out pollutants. I like to think of them like nature's sponge. Examples of those kind of things in our own backyards could be like rain gardens or disconnecting gutters to slow down that water. But like our rivers and streams, we need to make sure to protect our wetlands, even as they're acting as that great sponge of picking up all those nutrients and extra pollutants. We really want to protect them from all that water and the input that's going into them. So I thought we could play a fun little thought exercise. Looking at these pictures, both the ones on the left and the right, which stream do you think looks healthier? And how can you tell? Feel free to put into the chat box which one you think looks healthier and maybe one reason of why you think so. Is it the one on the left? Hopefully, can you see my screen? Was it this one or is it the one on the right? We'll see if anyone has any suggestions in the chat box. Okay, somebody said the left one, there's less erosion. Another one said left, there's more vegetation. You guys have been listening, I love it. More canopy layers. I like it. The left one, there is less dead plants. I really like that one. Yeah, you guys are all right. The one on the left, we would say is the healthier stream. We see evidence of, here, oh no, my little clicker is not working. Okay, there. We see evidence of erosion on the one on the right. The stream on the left has some of these like multiple canopy layers, like somebody said, with some native species. The one on the right has invasive species like blackberry that makes it difficult for other species like our native trees to establish and grow to create those canopy and buffer layers. So again, the stream on the left has a great buffer, where if we see the one on the right does not. So this is an example of an area with a no buffer. It is not helping filter out pollutants both from the air and ground. So in general, areas with no buffers equals no pollution filtration. For instance, if you have livestock and they have access to a creek, where do you think their poop is going? Okay, so maybe you don't have livestock, but what about a dog, or maybe some chemical or fertilizer application? Where is that going? Providing vegetation buffers can help slow down the water and buffer the water from those pollutants coming off of your property. And an extra benefit is that vegetation is taking up any extra nutrients from that manure or that fertilizer. So here's that same area as before, but now it is planted with a buffer. Again, planting this will provide a visually aesthetic area as well as keeping the pollutants out. Additionally, it will help cool the streams and prevent erosion. Here in Washington, salmon is king, not just king salmon, but they're very important. In the fall, you can see them returning to the streams. To help keep our salmon populations healthy and thriving, we need to have clean streams for them to live in. So what does this mean? One, preventing erosion. That erosion can cause the water to be mucky, and this can be harmful to salmon because the soil in that water covers the eggs and kills them, reducing the oxygen exchange in the eggs. Another benefit to buffer zones for salmon is the plants that help shade the stream and lower the water temperatures. There's also a lot of other organisms that benefit from this healthy stream, including crayfish, mussels, and other aquatic invertebrates. So that leads to one of the final big picture concepts. We are all connected to the watershed. In this slide, we can see how planting on private lots can help connect different natural areas on the stream, providing buffers in this entire length of the stream to help with cooling of the stream, preventing erosion, and an extra benefit of wildlife corridors. Connectivity is amazing. So buffers are great and all, but I don't have a creek in my yard. What can I do to help the creeks? Maybe you're like, am I still able to impact sediment, pollution, and stream temperatures? Yes. If you remember in that earlier slide, what we do on our properties can go into the storm drains and be dumped into the rivers and creeks. We are all members of that watershed. So even if you have like a lot of bare ground and that water is running over it, it's heating up before it's going into the storm drains and moving down, and that can be increasing the temperature. So with that, Bethany's going to talk about some specific things you can be doing.
Thanks, Ashley. So just like we said at the beginning, we can all play a part in protecting our streams. And so I work with the Watershed Alliance of Southwest Washington, and we're a Vancouver-based environmental nonprofit focusing on watershed health. So all these same topics. And specifically, I run a program for us called the Backyard Habitat Certification Program. It runs across the whole metro, and I do all the site visits for Clark County. And so I'll be talking a little bit about that program and other similar concepts, so we can talk more about those things as we go. So let's get going. Next slide, Ashley. So we all have an impact on stormwater runoff, and we've talked about a few of these things, but fertilizers and pesticides are commonly applied and sold at the stores all the time. So being educated about those things and taking our time to know what we're using in our yards is really important. And additionally, some other stormwater runoff impacts are animal waste, like livestock, as Ashley just mentioned, canines, and human waste too, when people recreate or live nearby the waters. Then you've also got soap, oil, and car fluids. So if you have a car, you're somehow contributing to this runoff. So anything you can do on your own property, which we'll talk about in a minute, to mitigate that is great. Additionally, household hazardous waste like oil, antifreeze, and paint. Sometimes people see those drains like this one in the picture and assume that they can just pour stuff down it and it'll be magically gone and clean. But a lot of times, different parts of town, there's no actual filtration happening in those things, and it just goes to the creeks. So of only rain down the drain. That's the main takeaway point on this slide. So if we're thinking about our property and what we have responsibility for, how can we reduce the pollution that leaves our space? So try to use your pesticides and fertilizers sparingly. You've heard about this in the previous webinars, but there's resources for making good choices about that. We'll talk about that in a minute, but using those things sparingly or not at all. Washing your cars at a car wash or over grass. The car washes have extra filtration measures in place to make sure that any water leaving their property is clean. So doing it there is great, or over your lawn can help with slowing down some of that runoff of soaps and chemicals, but try not to do it on the street would be great. Picking up a dog's poop. Poop is one of the main bacteria sources in the rivers and creeks. So cleaning up that is important. Similarly to the washing your cars is sweeping your driveway instead of washing it. A lot of people like to power wash, especially after a long winter, and that's just spraying and running off anything that was on your driveway into the nearest water body. So try to keep it swept up instead and use kitty litter to clean up spills. If you have a septic tank, you should look into the Poop Smart Clark program, which is doing a lot of focused efforts on educating people around the importance of healthy septic tank systems. And similarly, managing your manure properly is important for runoff too. So regardless of how big your property is, there's things you can do to mitigate the amount of pollution that's leaving your property. Next slide. So you probably heard about this in a previous presentation, but just to reiterate, when it comes to reducing pesticides, the Grow Smart, Grow Safe website is a really helpful resource for helping you choose the least toxic measures to handle whatever pest problem you're dealing with. In the backyard habitat certification program, we encourage everybody to steer away from anything ranked a red chemical, which would be the highly toxic ones, and stick with something less toxic. I like it too, because you can search by the pest problem or by the chemical to solve your problems. So try to do things with the least toxic method involved, and you'll be better off for you and the watershed. Next slide. And then reducing the volume of water that comes off of your property. If we're talking about how these things are washing off of our property into a water body or a storm drain, if we can keep the water on our property as much as possible, then we won't have that runoff issue to deal with. So some ways to do that are pictured here. I'm going to start at the top one. That's an example of naturescaping, using native plants for landscaping. When we like to call that naturescaping because it sounds good, but that's when you're favoring the native plants over the ornamental ones or lawn because of the diversity of the root system that can absorb the water. Additionally, if you have the opportunity to de-pave an area, that's what that middle picture is with the driveway. De-paving allows for minimal amount of pavement and more opportunities for the water to get absorbed, or any chemicals dripping from your car get absorbed by the landscaping rather than washing right down the street. In certain parts of town, you might have seen green streets, which is where there's a curb cut out into a planter that helps absorb the water. That's another option. Usually not super practical for the homeowner to put in, but the city can put them in to help mitigate what's running off of your property. And then the rain garden is that top right picture. And a rain garden is when you've disconnected your downspout to allow the water to flow into a big basin. And I like this picture because you can really get a sense of the bowl shape of this rain garden and what it looks like. That's got some rock there at the base of the water flow to prevent erosion, and then it just fills in that planting bed that's full of native plants. And those plants have deep roots, and they're known. You choose plants in the bottom of the basin that really like seasonal wetness and dryness, and can help filter the pollution and even absorb some of the pollution. So that's really helpful for keeping water on your property and getting to use it. Like, it doesn't make sense to let your rain go down the drain and then go turn on your hose and have to water your plants if you can use the rain that's falling. The last picture there is a picture of a green roof on a shed, which can be a great way to add more plants to your space on the roof, and obviously needs some special engineering, but it's another way to reduce the amount of runoff. But really, healthy plants and soil are our best tools for protecting the watershed. And so the more we can do to incorporate plants into our landscapes, the better it is, not just for the health of the water, but also the birds and pollinators. So that's why I like to focus quite a bit on naturescaping. These two pictures give you some examples of a shady native plant garden and a sunnier one. But in general, the native plants that we have in our area, they're adapted to the pests that are naturally here, as well as the soil conditions and water conditions that are common to our area. After a couple of years of planting and being established, they shouldn't need additional water inputs, except for like in a heat dome or something. So that's really nice that they're fairly self-sustaining because they're meant to be here. And then additionally, they don't need any fertilizer or pesticides most of the time because they're suited to our conditions here. So less maintenance also means they're less expensive. If you can reduce the amount of lawn you need to water and mow, that saves you those energy resources too. So we like to focus on choosing plants that are locally native to your area. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing you'll notice in these pictures too is like diversity, especially in the left one, of the canopy layer. You'll see trees in the background, and then in the middle and foreground, there's shrubs and ground covers. And so you're really creating a miniature example of what you would find naturally in the forest. Ashley, can you show the next slide? So this is a good example of what we're talking about. So on the right-hand side there, you see the different canopy layers named like overstory, understory, large shrubs, small shrubs, and ground covers. And so if you're thinking about the canopy layers, and then you look on the left-hand side and you see that different birds live in different layers, then it's fair to assume that the more layers you have represented in your yard, the more birds you'll have represented in your yard. And the reason we want to focus on the native layers is because particularly because of the insect relationships with those plants as well. So there's certain insects that will only nest or eat or lay their eggs on particular native plants. And so if we don't have those native plants represented, we don't have those insects represented in the food web, which is often the bird food for all those birds in the left-hand column. So you need all of it to really create a thriving system. So on the next slide, we've got some pictures of the different, a smattering of different plants. We've got a big leaf maple, big leaf maple, Oregon ash, red alder. Those are some examples of the tall tree canopy. And then you've got that middle row there shows you some red osier dogwood, red elderberries, salmonberries, cascara, and ocean spray. And then some smaller shrubs would be snowberry and thimbleberry and osoberry. So all of those are blooming at different times, providing different flower shapes, fruit colors, berries at different times of the year. And so there's always something to be provided for the birds and the insects in the area, and it can be a beautiful system. The next slide kind of just focuses in a little bit on that concept of a native plant. The term native, there's no like consistent definition of what native means. Someone might hear native plant and think native to North America or native to the Northwest, but it's nice to be able to know your own ecoregion and really think about what plants would be in your yard if your house and yard wasn't there? What would be occurring naturally? And try to recreate some of those things. And so one thing that helps is to look at a resource called the Portland Plant List. And this little map has a red circle around the Portland metro area. And the city of Portland wrote a list of all the native plants from that region. And so if we are thinking about like what the birds and insects need to survive, we should focus on the plants that are here to support the birds and insects that are here. That's the goal with choosing native plants. Certainly choosing plants from the rest of the Willamette Valley ecoregion is great too. But we like to focus in on that circle since they made such a cohesive, comprehensive list for us. So pretty cool. The next slides are some picture examples of some naturescapes in action. So this one's nice. It's got some riverbank lupin and some yellow monkey flowers and a cascara in the back and a nice water feature. So beautiful little pollinator patch and it could be in a really small yard. We don't have the whole context, but that right there would be providing some great pollinator and bird bath opportunities. And the next one is a bigger pollinator hedge. Native hedgerows can be a really great way to incorporate native plants and provide privacy as well. And this one provides all those things and pollinator habitat. This next one is a great example of using a shady understory native plant collection, because sometimes people have some really large evergreen trees that dry shade can be tricky to find plants that'll do well, but a lot of our native plants were suited to those conditions originally. So you can make a nice dense and lush green area, which also feeds the birds and provides habitat. And you'll see there in the bottom right, they incorporated a little bird bath on the ground, and they've got some feeders. So they're trying to provide for the whole system there. But in the background there, so you've got the Douglas firs and then some sword ferns and snowberries and fringe cup and a few things. So lots of good plant opportunities for the dry shade as well. So sometimes people think about this and they just are a little intimidated by the process, like where do we start? And so I want to let you guys know about the Backyard Habitat Certification Program, because it's an opportunity to get some personalized help with these questions, like how could I implement this in my yard? So the program is tailored to folks on under an acre, so an acre or less. And I would come out to the property and walk around with you and do a personalized site assessment, as well as write up a report of like, here's what you currently have going on and here's what you could do to improve habitat. And we also provide you with coupons and some other incentives to get you going on your way. And so if that's something that sounds interesting to you, you can enroll at backyardhabitats.org and they'll add you to a list and I'll come visit. So that would be really fun. And that's that picture there, in case you're wondering, that's some Clarkia flowers in my front yard. And if you like Clarkia, they were blooming from like June to November in my yard. Like it was crazy. So great pollinator plant and fun to have in the yard. So a little more about that program. We look at 5 categories and they're kind of overlapping a lot with the other categories that we've discussed in this webinar series. So removing invasive plants is a key element of the program, because if we're trying to build healthy habitat, we need to get the invaders out. And so those plants, they don't provide the same habitat benefits. So removing them is important. And then that creates more space for planting native species, which is the naturescaping element. And then we also talk about reducing pesticides, wildlife stewardship. So that's items like bird baths and bat houses and other things you can do. And then stormwater management is thinking about that runoff and how can we keep as much water safely on the property as we can, including rain gardens and planting large trees and leaving your leaves, things that help the soil absorb more water. So those are the 5 categories. So again, if this is something you're interested in, feel free and sign up on the enrollment page on the Backyard Habitat's website. And even if you're over an acre and you can't participate in the program, there's a great resource library on the website. So you could learn more about each of those topics from that website. So feel free to check it out. Next slide, Ashley.
I think this is me. So I was going to also mention, at Clark CD, we typically do site visits as under our Watershed Stewardship program for those of you that are over 1 acre. So if you are in that category, you would be contacting me for a site visit. So, and then I just wanted to say, so you also might be like, hey, I'm improving my property. I have a larger property. I want to do more. And I also want to meet great people. Where can I go and what else can I do, Bethany?
Oh, well, you can join us at the Watershed Alliance for some events. We've got all kinds of things to engage the community in healthy watershed actions. So this is a picture of a stewardship event where we're planting trees. I think this one was MLK Day, but we've got events monthly, whether it's plantings or litter cleanups or ivy removal, things like that. And then another event coming up is Earth Day Trivia Walk and Raffle. And so that's coming up in April, on April 23rd for Earth Day. You can join us there. That'll just be more of a fun one. You don't even need your work gloves that day. And then we also do a film series. And so this is an example of one of the films. They're all somehow environmentally themed. This one is fast fashion and it's in April. So we're doing one a month from February through May. And so you can sign up on our website. You can find out more about all these things at the watershedalliance.org or follow us on Instagram and Facebook to find out what we're up to. But try to do something at least once a month that engages the community in stewardship activities to take care of our watershed.
And on that note, Clark CD has the Watershed Steward workshops. Like this presentation, this web series has been part of our Watershed Stewardship program. Natalie had posted at the beginning of the presentation a couple of ways to visit it through our website, but we have a 5 class online series and you can become a watershed steward by participating in those. And then also, attend some of the past classes. Check those all out. They're on our YouTube channel. They're on our website, and you can, each of these topics goes way more in depth on septic or, managing household waste or any of these topics. So go and check those out to learn more as well. So I want to revisit kind of that poll that we talked about at the beginning of the talk. Now that you've listened to this presentation, you've listened to all the different presentations in this series potentially, what are some things that you are going to do to protect our streams? And you guys can put those in the chat as we're kind of wrapping these up. We'd love to see and hear some of those great suggestions of what you guys are doing and those actions, either an action or just, whatever you're doing, put those in the chat. And Bethany, I think this is you.
Remember, we can all play a part in protecting our streams.
And with that, I'd love to see some of your suggestions and we'll take some questions. So I like it. Convincing other members of my HOA to stop using pesticide and fertilizers. So cool.
We also have read some labels to see what pesticides I have. And continue to plant native plants and not use chemicals.
Nice. And if anyone wants to put their favorite native plant that they've planted or would want to plant, I would love to see those suggestions. I'm very jealous of Bethany's Clarkia.
All right, we do have a few questions. Starting with, so how can I start a native plant area when it is barren and just tons of blackberries are coming up and I don't want to use poison to get rid of them?
Go, Bethany.
Yeah. To get the native plants established, it'll be really important to get the space cleared of the blackberry. So the best way to do that is to dig them out by the roots using a shovel. But they will respond to like really persistent mowing for a few years. But if you want to do it faster, it's a dig it out kind of situation. And then the ground's probably going to be void of some nutrients, and so it would really benefit from like a layer of wood chips, and that'll also help suppress further resprouting from happening. And then give it a little time and you can plant right into that wood chips, the wood chips as they start to break down.
Yeah, and I would add a fun creative way, if you do have a larger area of blackberry infiltration, is get some goats. They really find them to be yummy as well, and they can help. But like Bethany said, it's really about just like getting them before they get too big to try to deplete them of their nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
All right, another question. I have a couple low areas that get soggy and swampy. What kind of plants can I plant there?
If you want to plant some trees, I would say like hemlocks are great, or cedars are really great. They really like to get their feet wet. And then depending on how wet it is, you could look at some like sedges or rushes if it's a constant wet area. Bethany, do you have any other fun plants?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the size of the space, but red osier dogwood is nice. Lupins some of the lupins can enjoy that as well. Sedges and rushes for sure. Yeah, there's quite a few options depending on the size that you want to go. Yeah.
Willows are great, and willows like dogwoods are awesome because if you have them in the area, you can just take cuttings of them. And so cheap way to get more planted.
Yeah. Douglas spirea is nice too, and salmonberry. They can both give you some nice flowers and handle that moisture.
We have a great resource on our website, and Bethany, you guys might as well, for building your own rain garden. And I also just like that because it has some great suggestions of plants in the back as well.
Yeah, because even if you don't build a rain garden, the plants that like a rain garden would like those seasonally soggy spots, or where the downspouts automatically going anyway. Yeah.
All right, speaking of downspouts, another question. Am I allowed to disconnect my downspout and redirect that water to stay in my landscape? The downspouts currently are connected to a pipe that goes under my yard and out to the street.
Nikki.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, Nikki, take that one.
I would probably interject here. Yeah. So most downspouts that are connected to the street, it's because your soils aren't, that don't have a lot of infiltration capacity. So if you have a tight soil, kind of a clay soil or a wet soil, you don't want to disconnect your downspouts because your soils won't be able to absorb that water. That's why they're tied into the street. Sometimes too, if you have a really small lot, or if you have 0 lot lines where your properties are really close to each other, if your soil doesn't have a good infiltration capacity, and disconnect that downspout, you could cause drainage issues. So if you're tied into the street, there might be a reason for that, an engineering reason. So I would be reluctant to disconnect your downspout. What you might think about too is if you have maybe 4 downspouts on your lot, if there's an area where you feel like you could disconnect one and kind of test it out rather than taking your whole system offline. So you're diverting a little bit of the water, but maybe not asking, your soils to take all of your roof runoff. And you could think about too, even rain barrels or something like that, that, would have an overflow diverter. So once the rain barrel fills up, it keeps going out to that pipe in the street, something that allows you to keep that drainage open. But it's gonna vary by property. But it, generally speaking, for the city of Vancouver, we would prefer your downspouts infiltrate. So if they aren't already going to soil, there might be a reason they're going to the street. So I would say proceed with caution on that one.
In that
Always
rain
do the
garden
test.
guide, Ashley, in that rain garden guide, there's a really good, at the very beginning, a resource for, or instructions on how to do an infiltration test. And that's like a really good thing to do, whether it's a rain garden or you're going to disconnect, like do an infiltration test and really see if it's the right thing for your property. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you're lucky like you and me, and you have like sandy loam soils that just say yes.
All right, looks like we have a couple questions about programs. So one person's asking, so how do we contact you, Ashley, to help assess and make recommendations for estates over 1 acre?
Go to clarkcd.org. My stuff's on there. I can put it in the chat, and then I will also be in a follow-up email. And then Bethany's contact information, I'm going to put it in the follow-up email as well.
Cool.
And then another question, if I have 5 acres, but I'm only concerned with less than 1 acre, can I click on less than 1 acre for the program?
No, the system will still kick you out and say you should talk to Ashley. That it'll say you should talk to the Clark Conservation District. So.
All right. So let's see. So there's a similar question about blackberry. They recently removed blackberry from behind their house, only not with a shovel, but it's clear now that it might come back. Is there something that would be best to plant now in a dry or shady understory area?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great shrubs. I think they're really good point that you are bringing up in your question is that, as soon as you're removing those blackberries, you need to be thinking about what you're going to be planting so that it's competing with the species or the blackberries that are there. And hopefully you've done a pretty good job on getting them out. Some of the things is, one thing would be making sure to shade out the area. So if you have the ability to plant some tree species, that would be important. And then a lot of our great native shrubs are, just a replacement of the other shrub of the blackberry. So I think of like, tall Oregon grape, huckleberries. I just think that because I think of wanting to eat something in replacement of the blackberries. Really a lot of, I'm blanking, Bethany.
Salal, snowberry,
Yep.
sword ferns, evergreen huckleberry, you mentioned that.
I will
yeah.
say with snowberry, be careful with it. It does spread a lot. So, just, which could be a good thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Some people are like, okay, now I have snowberry everywhere.
Right. Yeah, depending on how big a space it is. Similarly, thimbleberry can do really well in those conditions. Yeah. But spreads.
Yeah.
We have a few people wondering where's a good place to purchase native plants.
I saw that. I'm going to add a link here in the chat to a nice page that lists a whole bunch of nurseries that provide native plants, and it tells you like roughly how many species they carry and stuff. So that's my answer to that question. This is a really good map.
Yeah.
And it has a list of seed companies as well.
Yeah, and if you're planning on getting, I often provide a list as well on site visits with me. And I would say that because a lot of who I'm dealing with is those larger acreage people, if you're going to be buying a lot of plant material, really look towards your wholesaler nurseries, because sometimes they'll have limits, either dollar amount or number of stem amount. And so if you're going to be purchasing a lot, get a better deal and purchase from a wholesale nursery.
Right, another question is that, are there programs to help pay some of the costs?
Kind of. Bethany, I know the Backyard Habitat program has a lot of coupons for it. At the Conservation District, we sometimes are able to help if it's part of a larger project, like if you're on like a CREP project, or if you are part of maybe one of our farm planning projects where, you know, we're planting a buffer and keeping wildlife out of the streams, and sometimes there's financial assistance available then. So
Yeah, the Watershed Alliance has some resources available for folks who live on creeks in the city of Vancouver specifically. And then the Backyard Habitat program provides coupons for native plants, so which not exactly financial assistance, but kind of.
yeah.
Awesome. And then when is a good time to seed or plant, and what is the latest you want to try and start new plants?
The best time to do planting is it's like December through March. I always say like February is one of the best times. You can also do a fall planting, but when you're doing fall plantings, you're usually going to be looking at, so the bare root planting is kind of the other one, and the fall planting is typically for seeds and larger, like maybe plugs to container plants typically in the fall. But fall plantings is one that is a little bit overlooked because people don't think about it. You know, in the spring is when you're all like, oh, things are blooming, I want to. But the thing that's really important about fall plantings and those winter plantings is that just gives it enough time for the plants to have their roots start to get established throughout that season. And then as I mentioned, seeding is best. I like to say in like September, October, after those first rains, because that allows for the seeds to, some of the seed species need kind of that cold winter, as well as it gives that time for them to start establishing their roots. And then you'll have flowers in the spring.
Awesome. This is an interesting question. How can I help protect ponds and waterways that straddle my property and a utility easement?
Okay, can you repeat it? Ponds, I got the ponds in the
Protect ponds and waterways that straddle my property and a utility easement.
Yeah, I mean, you can do stuff on your property. You know, you have to talk to the property owner for, you know, the utility easement portion, but I would say, you know, do what you can on your property, and then yeah, maybe try to communicate with the other property owners.
Just a word on utility easements. So easements are just the right of access and entry to someone's property. So it's not actually owned by the utility.
Okay.
So say there's a sewer line that goes between your houses underground, the city doesn't own the land. They have an easement that allows them access and maintenance to it, but you would still own up to your property line. So if there's a right of way, like a BPA right of way, those overhead lines, and they can't plant anything underneath, a right of way is where they actually own it. You know, BPA owns that land, and you can't do anything because you don't own it. But an easement is different. So you'd be able to do plantings into an easement. If you have something like overhead power lines or something that you're worried about the utility accessing, you can contact like Clark PUD, and they may have a plant list for you to say, okay, if you want to do some native plantings in this utility easement, but we're concerned about overhead power, here's a list of trees and shrubs that stay lower so that, you know, it's my property and I can plant it, but so they're not going to come top your trees to get access to the overhead power. So those are some things to think about with easements. Generally, you still own the land, so you would still be able to do some things, but you might consider what the easement is for in making those plant selections.
And Nikki, you brought up you reminded me of Clark Public Utilities is another really great resource. They do streamside planting as part of their stream team program. And so that's another great avenue if you're looking to see. I'm still trying to figure out all their like requirements for it, but that is a great resource for some people as well.
And depending what invasive species you have, sometimes they have programming to help with specific weed removal too.
Yep.
All right, we're getting close to time. If you have any last questions, make sure to get them into the chat or Q&A box. And speaking of resources, this is a good time to bring up a part of this webinar series. We're compiling a list of resources that are related to all of the topics, all 7 topics. Which will be active after this week, after tonight. And so if you have any questions that weren't necessarily answered directly in the webinar talks, you can refer to that, and you can obviously reach out to the individuals. But that'll be a really good ongoing resource after these webinars are done. And then it looks like we have someone who said their favorite native plant is huckleberry, and because it attracts bumblebees, provides shelter for birds, and it's green all year, and it's easy to care for. It's awesome.
Nice. And it's tasty for us to eat.
All right, final question is that if salmon are said to be in your creek, when would you expect to see them?
Yeah, so I kind of talked about that earlier. I think the best time to view salmon in our creek is in the fall. You typically see them sometimes as early as August, and then they typically go. I know there's a couple of spring runs too, but they're usually kind of like February and later. So when I used to actually do Chinook surveys, and I was doing bulk of my work from September through November. So look in the creeks in the fall.
All right, well, thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Bethany, for a great talk.
Welcome.
And thank you, Nikki, for putting this together and choosing some great topics. And yeah, that's the end of our Healthy Homes, Healthy Water series. Again, we'll have that resource list, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And also, if you'd like to go back and rewatch any of the webinars, or if you missed one, that is on the Clark CD YouTube page. So thank you all very much for coming tonight, and we hope to see you virtually or maybe in person again soon.
Thank you.